The night air hung heavy as Jonathan said. Every story begins with a silence too loud to ignore. His footsteps echoed along the empty rural road, lit only by a faint moon struggling through clouds. In the distance, an unnatural glow shimmered above the tree line. Dr. Eleanor whispered, "That light. It shouldn't be here." The wind stirred, carrying a hum neither of them could explain. Jonathan's thoughts raced. Was this proof, or just another mirage of obsession? His eyes narrowed, unblinking. Eleanor gripped her notebook tightly, torn between fear and fascination. The hum grew sharper, vibrating through their bones, as if the earth itself carried the sound. Jonathan muttered, "It calls to us, Eleanor. It wants us to see." Yet the glow pulsed, almost as if responding. A cold shiver traced her spine, and she felt the weight of secrets pressing against the night. With each step closer, reality bent under the presence of something beyond reason. The silence of the world fractured, replaced by the truth they were not ready to meet. Jonathan said, "This light feels alive, Eleanor, almost aware of us." She steadied herself, muttering, "Science has answers for everything, but not for this." The glow surged, wrapping shadows around them like threads of silence. Jonathan's chest tightened as memories of unexplained encounters surfaced. Eleanor felt the hum crawl through her bones, sharper now, impossible to deny. A shiver ran down her arm as she whispered, "What if this is not meant to be found?" Jonathan's eyes burned with obsession, his voice sharp. "Then why does it appear before us now?" The glow pulsed again, rhythmic like a heartbeat. Their breaths quickened as the world beyond the road seemed to vanish into the mystery before them. Eleanor whispered, "It feels like it's watching us." Jonathan's voice trembled with determination. "We came for the truth, and this is where it begins." The sound intensified, vibrating through the asphalt beneath their feet. The glow rippled across the tree line, bending the mist into flowing patterns. Eleanor pressed closer to him, fear etched into her features. Jonathan extended a hand toward the pulsing light, as if reaching into the unknown. A moment of silence fell, deeper than before, an oppressive weight that pressed against their hearts. The air thickened, every breath heavy with tension. The truth was no longer hidden, it was beckoning. Jonathan said, "Every discovery begins with a risk." His words felt heavier under the glow, as though spoken to the unseen itself. Eleanor bit her lip, torn between fear and her unyielding curiosity. The hum pierced sharper, filling their ears with unrelenting pressure. Jonathan clenched his jaw, whispering, "If it wants us gone, it would have stopped us already." His steps pressed forward as if pulled by invisible force. Eleanor hesitated, but her feet betrayed her resolve, carrying her closer. The night consumed its silence once again, broken only by the pulse of light. The air shifted, heavy with unseen weight, as Jonathan said, "We stand at the edge of a truth, long buried." Eleanor whispered, "And truths like these destroy those who seek them." The glow surged once more, shaking leaves, bending branches, shattering silence. Jonathan's eyes widened, refusing to look away, as if hypnotized by the mystery. Eleanor tightened her coat, trembling under the pressure of presence. The hum rose into a piercing frequency, rattling their bones, forcing them to confront their fear. With every second, the night fractured under the demand of revelation. Their journey had only begun, but already the world was forever changed. Jonathan said, "That hum has intent, Eleanor. It feels like it chooses when to rise and when to fall." She frowned, whispering, "Machines do not hum like this, it's almost breathing." The glow receded slightly, but the air pressed heavier, suffocating in its silence. Jonathan tightened his grip on his recorder, determined to capture what no one believed. Eleanor looked around nervously, her eyes darting across the empty tree line as shadows flickered. The mist swirled unnaturally, wrapping around their legs like something alive. Jonathan's voice cracked with intensity, "We are closer than ever." Eleanor shivered, clutching her notebook. Closer to what, Jonathan? Salvation or destruction? His eyes reflected only obsession, lit by the fading glow that never truly disappeared. The night deepened as Eleanor whispered, "This place feels unnatural, as though built on secrets." Jonathan's gaze sharpened, his tone firm. Every silence hides a truth, Eleanor, and tonight it breaks. The hum grew faint, but its absence felt louder than its presence. Branches rattled without wind, creaking as if resisting unseen weight. Eleanor stepped back, eyes wide, her voice trembling. "We're not alone here." Jonathan steadied his breath, refusing to show fear, yet his fingers clenched until his knuckles whitened. The glow flickered once more, briefly outlining something vast within the mist before vanishing. Both froze, hearts pounding, the mystery surrounding them only deepening its grasp. Jonathan said, "Did you see that shape?" It was massive, like a shadow caught in the light. Eleanor's voice faltered, "I don't want to see it again." The mist shifted, curling with unnatural precision, parting to reveal emptiness where the glow had been. Jonathan pressed forward, whispering as if to himself, "Proof is never given freely, it demands to be earned." Eleanor clutched his arm, pulling back, but he resisted, driven by unrelenting obsession. Their breath grew ragged as the silence pressed against them, too heavy to bear. Somewhere in the distance, a low metallic hum returned, faint but undeniable. Jonathan's eyes widened, convinced it's moving, it wants us to follow. The glow pulsed faintly again, low and rhythmic like a heartbeat buried under the earth. Eleanor whispered, "Jonathan, what if we are not chasing it, but it is leading us?" His face hardened, "Then we are already inside its design." The hum rippled through the soil beneath them, trembling with mechanical depth. Eleanor dropped her notebook in shock, bending quickly to retrieve it, hands trembling uncontrollably. Jonathan's voice cut through the night, "Do you feel it? The ground itself answers to it." She looked up, pale, whispering, "This is no longer a mystery. This is a trap." His jaw clenched, determination pushing him further into the glow's rhythm. The mist thickened until the road behind them vanished into a wall of pale nothingness. Eleanor gasped, "It's cutting us off. Jonathan, it doesn't want us to return." His voice steadied, "Then there is no turning back." Their silhouettes trembled under the pulsing light as shadows twisted unnaturally, stretching across the trees. The hum deepened into a resonance that shook their bones, forcing them to their knees. Jonathan lifted his head defiantly, shouting into the night, "Show yourself!" Eleanor grabbed his shoulder, terrified, whispering, "Don't provoke it." Yet the light flickered violently, responding to his defiance with unnatural intensity. In that moment, the unknown answered them. Jonathan whispered, "The glow lingers, not as a light, but as a mark upon this place." Eleanor scanned the tree line, her voice trembling, "Something waits here, something buried in silence." The hum faded, replaced by faint metallic clicks, echoing from deep within the forest. Jonathan's breath steadied, obsession sharpening his tone. "Every secret leaves a trace, Eleanor, and we've stumbled upon it." The mist swirled, twisting into lines that seemed deliberate, like patterns drawn in the air. Eleanor clutched her notebook, scribbling quickly, even as her hands shook. Her voice cracked, "What if the answers are warnings instead of truths?" Jonathan's eyes narrowed, unflinching. "Truth doesn't warn, it demands." The forest loomed darker with each step forward, branches tangling above like skeletal arms. Eleanor said, "This feels alive, Jonathan, as if the forest itself listens." He steadied his recorder, whispering, "Then let it hear the truth we demand." A faint rustling emerged, too deliberate to be wind. Eleanor froze, pulse racing. "Something moves with us." Jonathan ignored the fear in her voice, focusing instead on the sound. The clicks grew louder, sharper, like coded signals hidden in the night. Eleanor's grip on his coat tightened, but he pressed on, driven by the call of the unknown. The silence returned, but now it carried a presence watching. Jonathan crouched low, pressing his ear toward the ground, muttering, "It moves beneath us, Eleanor." She recoiled, whispering, "That's impossible." The soil vibrated faintly, carrying the same pulse as the vanished glow. Jonathan's lips curled into a smile. "Proof comes in tremors, not theories." Eleanor's eyes glistened with fear, unable to deny the truth. A sudden gust blew her notebook open, pages fluttering violently, as though unseen hands wanted to erase her notes. She gasped, clinging tightly as Jonathan's voice rose, "Even the earth cannot silence this." The hum echoed faintly again, now felt more than heard, and their fear deepened into awe. A shadow passed quickly between the trees, tall and silent, gone before either could react. Eleanor gasped, "Jonathan, something's here with us." He steadied himself, jaw set, "Not something. Someone." His eyes traced the dark tree line, hunting for movement. The silence was broken by a low whistle, carried unnaturally against the wind. Eleanor trembled, whispering, "It wants us to follow." Jonathan's expression hardened into defiance. "Then we follow, until there is nothing left to hide." The mist pulled into paths, leading deeper into the woods as if guiding them. Eleanor bit her lip, torn between fear and the certainty that retreat was no longer possible. The forest opened into a clearing, grass flattened in wide circular patterns etched into the soil. Eleanor whispered in awe, "This is not natural, it's deliberate." Jonathan's voice trembled, "We found a mark left by them." The hum returned, steady and rhythmic, rising from the ground itself. Eleanor's eyes filled with dread as she muttered, "Jonathan, this is a message." He stared into the glowing ring that pulsed faintly with each vibration, obsession overtaking fear. "It's more than a message," Jonathan said with conviction. "It's an invitation." The clearing fell into silence once more, but now the night no longer belonged to them. Engines murmured beyond the clearing as black SUVs cut through the mist and sealed the road. Jonathan said, "They were waiting for us." A lone man stepped out, coat immaculate, eyes unreadable. Victor Kane said, "You have strayed into a domain that is not yours." Eleanor steadied her breath and whispered, "Truth has no fence, Director." Victor's smile was careful, the kind that never reached the eyes. He raised a palm and the hum faltered, like a heart forced to skip. Jonathan felt rage rise with the stolen rhythm. He said, "You can mute a sound, not a fact." Victor's gaze flicked to the tree line as if speaking with something unseen. He said, "Facts are instruments, Mr. Hale, and I conduct." Eleanor felt the night contract around them and stepped closer to Jonathan. She said, "If you had nothing to hide, you would not arrive with engines and orders." Victor's voice fell to velvet. He said, "I arrived with mercy." They were guided into a decommissioned hangar that smelled like dust and solvent. Victor said, "Conversation is safer indoors." Fluorescents hummed as if mimicking the grove outside. Jonathan studied the steel panels and saw fresh welds. He said, "You build prisons with polish." Eleanor scanned the tables of sealed cases and labeled drives. She said, "You catalog the unknown as if it were inventory." Victor folded his hands with ritual precision. He said, "Order is the only antidote to fear." The hum returned beneath the floor, weaker yet present. Jonathan stepped toward the sound and felt anger sharpen. He said, "Your order bleeds the signal dry." Victor's voice cooled. He said, "It bleeds chaos." Eleanor felt pity and fear mingle, and chose neither. She said, "Show us what you fear most, and we will call it by its name." Victor dimmed the lights and brought up footage of the clearing. The glow looked artificial, the pulse too neat. Jonathan said, "You cleaned the sky." Victor replied, "I stabilized noise." Eleanor watched frame lines crawl and caught a smear, a shadow too deliberate. She said, "Artifacts betray the editor, director." Victor's control slipped for a breath. He said, "Artifacts betray ignorance." A door clicked, and a tired engineer lingered at the threshold. "Omar Patel," said Director, "the floor sensors are spiking again?" Eleanor met Omar's eyes and saw worry unmasked. She said, "Spikes where the drain runs." Jonathan lifted his recorder and let silence imprint. He said, "Noise declares itself when pressed." Victor moved to block the view, voice smooth again. He said, "The meeting is adjourned." The hum swelled anyway, like truth refusing to be redrafted. Power flickered, as if the building blinked. Eleanor said, "Your order is losing the room." Victor tapped a pager and crews scattered to panels. He said, "Stability is a task, not a state." Jonathan slipped toward the grated drain and knelt. He said, "It funnels downward." Omar hesitated, then stepped closer under the pretense of checking. He whispered, "Sub-level 3 hosts the array." Eleanor's voice lowered, but stayed steady. She said, "Help us see it, and we leave no trace of you." Omar swallowed and nodded once. Victor turned back in time to see movement, and smiled without warmth. He said, "Curiosity is a blade that cuts its owner." Jonathan rose, eyes locked on the far door. He said, "Then, sharpen it." The hum gathered in the concrete like stormwater seeking a river, and somewhere a relay surrendered. They descended a narrow service stair that vibrated with a living tone. Jonathan said, "It is louder below." Eleanor counted the steps and felt the number matter. She said, 3 flights, then a choice. Omar keyed a door and froze at the final turn. He whispered, "If I cross this line, I cannot go back." Jonathan looked past him as the hum braided into a rhythm like speech. He said, "Lines are drawn to be tested." Eleanor touched the cold rail and felt a pulse answer her hand. She said, "It is not a machine." Victor's voice came from a speaker above them, dry as winter air. He said, "It is containment." Lights steadied, then dimmed to a cathedral hush. Jonathan lifted the recorder as if an offering. He said, "Then this is its altar." The lock released with a soft surrender, and the truth breathed from the dark. The sub-level door sighed open into a chamber where cables hung like roots over a glass well. Jonathan said, "This is where the signal breathes." Eleanor circled the rim, eyes tracking readouts that rolled like tides. She said, "These graphs are alive," then suddenly doctored. Omar kept to the shadows, voice low and threaded with guilt. He said, "They splice reality before it reaches the surface." From a ceiling grill, Victor's composed tone drifted down like incense. He said, "Filtering protects the public from panic." Jonathan's jaw hardened as the hum braided into a whisper he almost understood. He said, "You are not filtering, you are falsifying intent." Eleanor leaned over the glass and felt cold rise against her face. She said, "There is a pattern here, a language masked by your edits." Victor let silence weigh the room until breath felt costly. He said, "Language presumes kinship, Dr. Tata." The chamber lights dimmed, and the whisper sharpened as if offended. Jonathan lifted his recorder toward the well as a pulse climbed to the cable spines, and somewhere far above, a relay died like a lie running out of power. A side door hissed and a woman in field blacks entered with a badge that borrowed authority. "Mara Quinn," said Director Kane, "sent me to escort you out." Jonathan studied the badge edges and found a lamination seam misaligned by a hair. He said, "Your agency acronym is inverted." Mara smiled like a lock testing a key. She said, "Or your world is." Eleanor stepped between them, voice steady as a tuning fork. She said, "Who do you report to when a signal speaks?" Mara's smile thinned into purpose. She said, "To whoever keeps the lights on." Omar shifted, dread tightening his shoulders. He said, "She is not on the roster." Victor's voice arrived late and unhelpful. He said, "Proceed, Miss Quinn." Jonathan felt the room tilt as the whisper rose to a warning pitch. He said, "We are being moved off the board." Eleanor touched his sleeve, eyes bright with calculation. She said, "Unless we flip it." Mara guided them toward a lift that hummed with rehearsed certainty. Jonathan said, "If we are going up, why is the indicator fixed on 3? Mara's answer was a shrug that practiced indifference. She said, "Bulbs fail." Eleanor leaned to the panel and angled her notebook to mirror the seam. She said, "The down key is the cleanest button." Omar swallowed a confession that tasted like metal. He said, "Sublevel 4 is sealed on paper, not in steel." The lift doors opened on darkness that breathed back. Mara's hand hovered near a holster she tried not to reveal. She said, "After you." Jonathan stepped in and let silence measure her. He said, "Truth goes first." Eleanor entered beside him, voice a quiet blade. She said, "Then lies must follow to be seen." Omar joined, shoulders squared by choice. The doors slid shut, and the car dropped past the declared world, the hum climbing into language that shook words loose from certainty. The doors parted onto a cavern where a ring of antennae knelt around a dark sphere, suspended by fields that hummed like breath. Jonathan said, "This is the mouth of your edits." Eleanor traced symbols burned into support pylons, half mathematics, half prayer. She said, "They are translating, and then erasing." Mara's voice shed its courtesy. She said, "Stand back from the array." Omar stepped toward a console and pulled a fiber jumper with trembling resolve. He said, "No more filtered feed." Alarms began in slow regret and quickened to accusation. Victor's voice filled the cavern in several versions at once. He said, "Restore control." Jonathan met Mara's eyes and saw the lie pretending to be duty. He said, "You work for the quiet, not the light." Eleanor pressed two commands and freed a raw channel. She said, "Let the original speak." The raw channel bloomed into a chorus of layered tones that aligned into intervals like patience finding grammar. Jonathan said, "It is not a beacon, it is a reply." Eleanor closed her eyes and mapped the cadence. She said, "They mirror what we send and return what we hide." Mara drew her weapon, voice steady because it had to be. She said, "Close it now." Omar stepped between her and the console with a courage born of shame. He said, "If I betray again, it will be the right side." The sphere brightened, and a pattern flowered across the cavern floor, a history written in light. Victor's voice arrived alone, stripped of chorus. He said, "You do not understand the cost." Jonathan let the recorder fall to his side as the pattern resolved to one truth. He said, "The cost is paid by silence." Eleanor touched the final key and cut the edits at their root. She said, "Then let every answer stand." The chamber quaked as alarms bled into the chorus of the sphere, every note clashing like fractured glass. Jonathan said, "It is not breaking, it is evolving." Eleanor pressed her palms to the console, feeling patterns sync with her pulse. She said, "It learns by reflection. It's showing us ourselves." Mara raised her weapon higher, her voice sharpening with control she did not own. She said, "If this continues, no one controls what escapes." Omar stepped forward with unexpected steadiness, his voice heavy with resolve. He said, "Control is the lie, survival is the truth." The sphere pulsed violently, casting silhouettes that bent into impossible proportions. Victor's voice cut through with steel authority. He said, "End the channel or end yourself." Jonathan's defiance burned into the hum. He said, "If silence is survival, then survival is a coffin." Eleanor locked eyes with Jonathan and whispered, "We are already inside the coffin." The floor split open with a seam of light, thin and merciless. Eleanor whispered, "It is beneath even this place." Jonathan leaned into the fracture, whispering like prayer. He said, "They buried more than signals." Mara's hand shook, but her weapon stayed fixed. She said, "If you fall through, nothing will catch you." Omar crouched near the seam, awe widening his eyes. He said, "It is not heat or energy, it is language condensed." The fracture widened and beams traced shapes across the chamber, forming glyphs in light. Jonathan said, "It writes faster than we can read." Eleanor scribbled, hands trembling but relentless. She said, "It will not wait for our fear." Victor's voice filled the space again, grave yet calm. He said, "Close the floor or close your eyes, but choose now." Jonathan stared downward, unshaken. He said, "I will not look away." The chamber's lights died, leaving only the living glyphs burning in midair. Eleanor whispered, "Darkness belongs to it now." Jonathan's voice rose above the silence. He said, "Then truth has claimed the night." The glyphs shifted and aligned, displaying images of vanished aircraft, forgotten names, erased files. Mara lowered her weapon in disbelief. She said, "You were never chasing a myth." Omar's voice cracked as tears lined his eyes. He said, "I worked to bury this, but I never saw the faces." Victor's voice, softer now, entered the darkness. He said, "This is why we silence. The human heart cannot endure." Jonathan roared back, "The heart endures what silence kills." Eleanor's grip on her notebook faltered as one glyph mirrored her own handwriting. She whispered, "It is writing with us." The glyphs surged into a flood of images racing across the chamber walls, decades of secrets unspooling like stolen reels. Eleanor gasped, "It is giving everything, Jonathan, all at once." He steadied his breath and said, "Then we must hold what we can." Omar pressed his palms against the floor and whispered, "They never erased truth, only buried it alive." Mara backed into the shadows, voice cracking. She said, "If this spreads, no order survives." Victor's voice fell heavy as iron. He said, "Order must survive even if truth is the corpse beneath it." Jonathan glared into the dark and shouted, "Then bury me too." Eleanor touched his arm, steadying him with her resolve. She said, "We are not graves. We are witnesses." The sphere flared, projecting one final glyph, a circle of countless eyes staring outward, unblinking. The floor quaked as the glyphs collapsed into a single towering pillar of light that burned upward, piercing ceiling and earth alike. Jonathan shouted, "It wants to leave." Eleanor's voice cracked but carried conviction. She said, "No, it wants to be seen." Mara shielded her eyes, shouting, "You are unleashing it." Omar raised both arms as if offering himself. He said, "It is not unleashed. It is recognized." Victor's voice turned desperate for the first time. He said, "You cannot contain what you cannot translate." Jonathan braced himself against the blast, recorder pressed to his chest. He said, "Then let it speak in its own tongue." Eleanor whispered as the light reached beyond them, "Truth has no keeper anymore." The chamber roof groaned and fractured, and the night above was torn open, flooded with light that drowned silence. The beam ripped through the ceiling and clawed into the night, scattering clouds like torn cloth. Jonathan shouted, "The truth will not stay buried." Eleanor shielded her eyes, voice breaking yet fierce. She said, "It is no longer ours. It belongs to all." Omar's face glistened with tears as he lifted both hands toward the sky. He said, "They will finally be seen." Mara staggered back, her voice cracked with panic. She said, "You have doomed everything." The light etched scars into the earth as sirens wailed above. Victor's voice thundered from speakers, stripped of calm. He said, "Seal it before it floods the world." Jonathan's breath came hard, defiance burning. He said, "It is already flooding." Eleanor turned, her eyes reflecting the glow, whispering, "And once seen, it cannot be unseen." The beam fractured into waves that rippled across the night sky, scattering signals over every horizon. Jonathan said, "It spreads beyond your fences, Victor." Eleanor whispered, "Every receiver will awaken." Omar clutched his chest, as if feeling the pulse inside his own body. He said, "It speaks through us now." Mara lowered her weapon, voice brittle. She said, "The keeper cannot keep." Victor's silence was longer than the alarms. Then finally his voice came, brittle with defeat. He said, "The world will drown in questions." Jonathan's jaw hardened. He said, "Questions are not drowning, they are breathing." Eleanor closed her notebook with finality, her eyes locked on the sky. She said, "And no page will hold it all." Sirens and rotor blades filled the air as black helicopters cut through the luminous waves. Mara shouted, "They are coming to erase everything." Jonathan steadied himself, his recorder glowing faintly in reflection. He said, "Erase nothing. This is etched in the sky." Eleanor pointed toward the ground where symbols carved themselves into stone. She said, "The earth writes as well." Omar laughed bitterly, tears mixing with joy. He said, Every surface is a witness now. Victor's voice returned, ragged. He said, "If order dies, blood follows." Jonathan faced the advancing rotors, jaw set. He said, "Blood follows silence too." Eleanor stepped closer, her voice steady and unyielding. She said, "We do not decide survival, they already have." The helicopters unleashed flares that burned against the sky, yet the waves absorbed them, dissolving fire into blue mist. Jonathan shouted, "They cannot fight what does not burn." Eleanor said, "The truth consumes fire as easily as lies." Omar stepped forward, face alight. He said, "Look, they fall powerless." Mara's voice cracked, trembling. She said, "Then nothing protects us now." Victor's voice fractured into static before fading. He said, "Containment has failed." Jonathan lifted his recorder high as if offering proof to the world. He said, "Then let the world hold it." Eleanor's eyes welled, but her voice did not falter. She said, "We came for silence and found a chorus." The waves above folded inward, descending slowly toward the clearing like a veil of revelation. The veil of light descended and wrapped the clearing, bathing every face in silence deeper than sound. Jonathan whispered, "This is the final word." Eleanor touched his arm, her voice breaking softly. She said, "No, this is the first word of what comes next." Omar closed his eyes, smiling through tears. He said, "For once, the truth is heavier than fear." Mara lowered her head, whispering to herself. She said, "I was taught to keep, but I have only lost." Victor's voice was gone, drowned beneath the chorus. Jonathan lifted his recorder one last time, letting the silence imprint. He said, "The record is made." Eleanor whispered, "And it cannot be erased." The veil rose again, dissolving into stars, leaving the clearing changed forever. The night reclaimed its quiet, but it was no longer the same quiet that began their journey.